right, and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I'm your host, Courtenay, and I'm super passionate about moving and thinking. On this show, we are going to dive into all things health, fitness, personal development, lifestyle, and political, sociocultural. I've always been fascinated by people, and I love learning from the experiences and stories of others. This has been a treat for me, and I hope this is enjoyable and useful for you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or any way that I can make this a better experience for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Hello, welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. I am back with Alex from Stolen History. How are you doing today, Alex?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here again. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. It was awesome last time. I learned so much, and I think other people, the audience, really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to diving further in. So we were just talking about like where to start, and there's so much. But I think there was a really good suggestion to maybe start with some of the things that we covered lightly and go further into depth. I personally would love to do a more in-depth kind of dive on Tataria. I'm very fascinated by that. So yeah, so maybe you can start by giving us a little bit of an overview. For those who have missed the last one, obviously they can go watch it, but maybe just give like one or two lines about what stolen history is, what you do with them, and then we can dive in.
Yep. So I am a moderator and contributor researcher on stolenhistory.net. We are a free to use forum platform for alternative history. It's completely free to sign up. If you want to create an account, come join us over there. We are a loosely associated group of people from various backgrounds all over the planet who have gotten together because we don't believe the mainstream historical narrative. And while we may not all agree with each other on what the truth is, the important thing is we're all here and we're all wanting to try to get to some level of truth. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. We have a YouTube channel, of course, too, where we've been producing a few documentaries. So lots of video content as well. And of course, we have a really awesome library that you can go. Once you create an account on our forum, you have access to some really totally free, great resources. So we are value for value. We do operate exclusively on donations, so we're all volunteers, so it's a lot of fun, and it gets me to have these really awesome conversations.
Yeah,
because I won't stop talking about it. As long as people want me to talk about it, I'll keep talking about it.
Well, I for one am very grateful. So yeah, so let's start with Tataria. If you can give us just like a little bit of an overview of what it is and some of the theories behind it. Yeah.
So Tartary is an area of the planet, what now would be Russia and Siberia and China, into Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and whatnot. That the mainstream calls a loosely associated nomadic tribes that all sort of didn't really have any nations or cities. They just kind of had a cultural area. They drank a lot of milk and they rode around on horses. The appearance of Tartary on maps has led researchers to attempt to investigate what happened and why at a certain point in the historical narrative that area ceased to be known as Tartaria. In the process of doing that research, there's been a lot of different theories about what happened in that period of time. Specifically, Russia's historical narrative is in pretty bad shape. They've been reset just like the rest of us in the past. So they're the first ones that started, really digging into the research initially. And that's kind of what got everything started. And what you'll commonly see if you've seen an image on social media typically is where a lot of people may have come across these topics. It's associated with, very, sort of grand utopian technology, which has its issues. I don't necessarily think I would connect it to that, but what I can say, and what I do find interesting about Tartaria, is that it was at one point a global civilization. What I mean by that is they settled in both, or that at one point they existed both on the Asian continent and on the North American continent simultaneously. We see that through studies of haplogroups, as well as the historical books written in the early 19th century by a few researchers back then who were going around and describing early Western America. So what you can think of it as is there was a large interior group of a civilization that had its own cities, that had its own kings, that expanded out, potentially wiped out the mound builder race in North America. There's reports of that is the reason that the mound builders don't exist anymore, is because a Mongol-like horde came over through, the Bering Strait, or possibly through ship travel, and dominated the North American continent about the same time that Attila the Hun was doing the same. And again, this is all just reference points for history. I'm not confirming or denying the existence of Attila the Hun as an actual historical figure, or what year that actually happened in. But as a reference point, that would be, for someone who's new to this, that you can think of it in the same way. It would be as if those types of invasions were also happening in Eastern Europe and in America at the same time. Tartaria and Tartary has been split up on the map several times into things like Chinese Tartary and independent Tartary. The mainstream explanation, which I don't necessarily disagree with to some extent, is that Tartary is a Western substitution for lands they didn't really understand or have good records of. Like a colonial way of referring to a country that they are an area, a massive tract of land with confusing origins, and they look a certain way. The Manchu Tartars look what is now Chinese, Asian, and then you had more Siberian. So there were distinct cultures, but in an attempt to sort of define it, the colonial invention of Tartaria is what made it onto the maps. So it's almost like, for lack of a better word, what's interesting about Tartary is it sounds like territory. And there's like potentially an etymological connection between those two concepts, is that it was just territory that we didn't quite understand. But as I mentioned in the beginning, that is what I've come to learn about Tartaria personally in my own research. People will take it a lot farther than me and say that they also lived in a harmonious, technologically advanced civilization, which is obviously the much more sexy thing to talk about when it comes to Tartary, because I just spent 10 minutes talking to you like I'm a history professor, and you may have fallen asleep at your desks. But the point is that there is real history behind this concept. So when people tell you, sort of brush it away, like, well, it's, this wasn't even a country. Well, there's a lot of evidence to show that there's a lot more to this culture, this race of people, than is just sort of, dismissed outright because of its association with a much more difficult to prove, but still valid argument about an ancient world or a near ancient world being much more technologically advanced than we initially thought.
Right. So what would some of the evidence for Tataria being this technologically advanced? And also, I think there's theories that they were kind of like this, they were very powerful. They kind of owned most of the globe, right? That they had colonized.
Well, yeah, they were fierce warriors. They had a lot of resources. I mean, Russia to this day is considered, the most resource rich area on the planet, or one of the most resource rich areas on the planet. Right. So, and India as well. I mean, and you got to think in those areas. So if you control that part of the world, you have a lot of access to resources, and you would have a lot of power. In the ancient world, in the modern world, it's the same thing. So yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that if there was, a globe spanning culture, they may definitely have done that. So, and I forgot the second part of where we were going. I apologize.
What is the evidence for that they might have had this technically advanced society?
The evidence that is presented is the structures that they built, how they were built, and not just buildings, earthworks, terraforming, canals, things of that nature. But what I find, why I disagree with associating it with Tartaria is because that is a global phenomenon, and I don't think the Tartarians or whoever were truly that fully global civilization. I think there's a lot more to it than that. So I don't know if this was a precursor, like an earlier period of time, to this sort of Tartarian spreading of this culture, civilization on two continents. But what I do know is that whatever designed this infrastructure is extremely technologically advanced to a level that we are having a hard time comprehending, because the ancient ruins, and even to some extent the later stuff, the structures, the Gothic cathedrals, they're beautiful, of course, but and they have astrological alignments and all those very important things that have been talked about a good amount in alternative history communities, and art, alternative archaeology. But what hasn't really been talked about is the combination of that with the newer, what they say are newer structures, and that paint a greater picture of a more connected world, again through the terraforming element of this culture. And that's kind of where you start getting into the alternative energy grid earth that we seem to live on, and it seemed to have been constructed at some point in the past, that are also connected with these star forts.
Right. I definitely want to get into that. But before we do, I just want to ask another thing about Tataria. What type, are there any kind of evidence of what the culture would have been like? Like what is unique about Tataria? And my second question related to that is then why is it not in existence now?
So I can tell you that there are actually lots of books written in between the 16 and the 1800s that go into the interactions between Western, Portuguese, English people who would sort of go and write about their travels to Tartaria, and it's they're, again, it just depends on where they are, because you have to think this huge, what we're talking about when we say Tartary is a huge tract of land with a lot of different cultures. So it's not a homogenous thing.
Right.
is mostly what is remarked about that. Now, sort of they do have that sort of like stout, swarthy sort of attitude about them. The Scythians were the sort of precursors to the Tartars, and the Scythians were an ancient horse lord sort of race of people that lived in near the Caucasus Mountains, and they had a lot of mound structures, and they were very well respected warriors. That area has always been kind of known for a very warlike and a very aggressive, but also honorable is another word that they use to describe their interactions between the Scythians, or the in the Scythians anyway. The Tartars were kind of for lack of a better term, shit on by the time the 1800s rolled around. They're kind of looked down upon. They're not really held in high regard. Again, they're kind of just considered like, there's just a bunch of milk drinkers. It's kind of the attitude of the Western, and that's all we really have to go on. Is the accounts of these people. And
sure,
again, how accurate is it? I can't really say for sure. They certainly, I haven't found a book where they mentioned like, oh, they also had this crazy interconnected grid network that was providing free energy to them. Like, it's not there. There's no connect. I haven't found it.
Right.
It might be out there somewhere in a basement somewhere in someone's private collections. But from what I've seen, certainly that's not something that is mentioned by anyone who claimed to have visited there in those times. So
Interesting. Why do you think they keep attributing that to them if there isn't a whole lot of evidence to support it?
Why do we think that the Tartarians have been associated with the high technology?
Yeah.
Because when you are two things, and honestly, the main one is to discredit an argument. It's a rhetorical tactic, like a form of disinfo or propaganda,
right,
that you would immediately, so like to use another analogy that people may be more familiar with, it would be like saying you have problems with the heliocentric model of the planet versus saying, oh, you're a flat earther.
right,
It's twisting words and simplifying and reducing someone's argument down to a meme,
right,
in order to discredit it.
yeah.
So it's not just that it's about Tartary disappearing off the maps. It's also that they're associated with this grand world, and typically the same people who would kind of take that to that extreme would take it even farther, of course, than I would, which is where you start getting into things like all mountains are melted buildings, and giant mountains being mud fossils, and the giant world trees that are the geologic structures in all over the world that kind of look like trees that have been cut. It kind of leads to this very like nebulous, new agey kind of Christianity culty kind of vibe that mishmashes a bunch of stuff together, that don't really make a lot of sense, and detract from what is important, which is that we're seeing evidence of an ancient energy terraforming. There is a lot of really interesting stuff that's being hidden from us in the realm of alternative energy and how this planet used to operate. But it's being kind of, it's being propagandized. It's being sold back to someone as something completely different, to gain attention. and to throw things out of proportion.
And to avert, right?
Right.
Or divert. Yeah.
Right. So the next time you're having a conversation with somebody who's never heard this material before, and I've actually had this happen before, they start Googling it, right? That's what always, so because there's something they've never heard. Well, I'm just going to Google it. And what comes up is like the two articles. There's like that Bloomberg one. I think you posted the image of it last time. We talked about it last time.
Exactly. Yeah.
There was another one that came out, I think back earlier this year, that was very similar. And it was funny because it mentioned it as like, some have called this the QAnon of architecture. It's like the only reason people have said that is because the one article that was written about it a year ago called it that, and that's like the proof that like, oh yeah, people are calling it this. It's like, no, they aren't. You are. These people are. So yeah, they Google it and they find those two articles and they're satisfied that they don't have to think about it anymore. It's over. There's no more conversation to be had. You can't. But again, that's why I don't really talk about Tartary and Tartarians associated with this. There's no proof yet, and that's fine. Maybe there will be proof, and I'm not saying that maybe they didn't have access to some of this stuff. Nikola Tesla was from an area that would have been Tartary. Essentially back before that. And I wonder if he did invent all those things that he did. I wonder if it was because he was in an area that may have still understood kind of how this stuff worked. Or it was still working to some extent. Because I think the evidence is there, or I think there's a strong case to be made that there is evidence of this. But obviously the biggest problem is putting it to the test and combining it with research that people do into alternative energy and alternative energy principles, and keeping them alive long enough to synthesize it with ancient history and archaeology. Because unfortunately, the people who end up getting really into that stuff on the practical side, like developing alternative energy, those people don't tend to be around very long, unfortunately.
Well, that alone says quite a bit, doesn't it? That's at least worth the questioning why that is. So, yeah. And I think with the Tartary, just the fact that there is an ancient civilization and culture in of itself should be interesting enough to investigate without attaching. I mean, as you said, we may find that there is evidence to support these other theories, but I think just investigating that alone is worthwhile. And that's a hidden, or a lost kind of untalked about culture and civilization that could be a key to learning more about our current culture and civilization.
What I think, what I will say about Tartary and it being a large civilization that I think would be a little on the conspiratorial side that I would buy into is the theory that the Napoleon's march to Moscow and the War of 1812 in America was a simultaneous attack on Tartars to clear them out of their native lands. And you have to think too, because not that long after that, you had the Trail of Tears in America as well. So if you imagine, in France and Napoleon pushing in all the way into Moscow at the same time, you have this force in America pushing westward. You may start to get a picture that there was they had some level of parity with the current culture that was in the process of invading, and that allowed them to be able to claim so much of not only Russia and Siberia and redevelop it and reset that area, but also to do the same with what we call the Native Americans, but what we call the Native Americans may be direct descendants of these Tartarians. So
Wow.
there is a connection there, and there is a reason it's important, especially for a lot of people who are Native American or have Native American blood, who are interested in their heritage,
Sure.
to learn that there is this kind of unspoken, or it was spoken about 200 years ago, but it's not spoken about now. It's not really allowed to. It's interesting that we have a society in which there are purposefully obscuring the origins of Americans specifically.
Yeah. I think that is really, really fascinating. What are your thoughts on that? Like, why, what are some reasons why they're doing that? And it does seem like America in particular, right? I mean,
I
there's
think
truth, it's hidden all over the world, but I think America in particular feels very, like covered up
it
in the history.
it 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 leads me to think that if you were trying to hide the truth,
Mm-hmm.
that you found a lot of this stuff here already,
Mm-hmm.
and you murdered and wholesale genocided many people in order to not only take it, but take it and claim it's yours. It wasn't that enough for these people back then. The hubris of these people who were settling and creating this land, the hubris of these people to take credit for things they didn't actually do or construct, and having to invent a narrative around it that now people have had to like tiptoe around for 200 years. And it's just now starting to, because the internet is just now starting to not really make any sense. And most of the people alive, even the people who are descendants of these people, probably, I don't even know if they know. You know what I mean? I don't even know if they know what the real history was before they got there. I'm not saying that these people are holding on to this
Right.
technology. I'm sure there are some.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's pretty clear that there are certain groups who definitely know.
Yeah.
Wink, wink.
Right. For sure.
But it's very few and far between, and they don't really use it in a practical sense that benefits humanity.
Right.
It's a gesture. They use it as a way of of showing their prowess, constructing a huge building, beautiful
Mm-hmm.
building. Because I mean, not all these structures that we've talked about, were built by a previously wiped out race. There's definitely buildings and things that this society has constructed,
Of course.
that are really impressive and really beautiful and follow a lot of the same principles. But again, is it a principle in the sense that they're just echoing and copying what originally was used for a different purpose?
Mm.
If your cathedrals and your churches were former energy structures, whether that's internal energy
Mm-hmm.
or external energy,
Right.
are they necessarily building it with the intention of tapping into that, or are they just using those principles to construct something beautiful? Because by design, if you were going to make a harmonious energetic structure, there would be sacred geometry, there would be exotic materials, there would be all these different principles, there would be access to water, or in the case of the pyramids, limestone aquifers underneath. Like, there's all these different things
Right.
that suggests that there's some sort of energetic principles, but nobody's really been able to figure it out or prove it. So that's kind of the big question, is like, how did it work, and
Right.
what did they use it to create?
Right. What was the purpose?
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a really big question that makes our society very uncomfortable, because again, if Americans knew that they were the descendants of, or that there were some descendants of this, wiped out race, or that there was evidence of these technologies that existed and were known. I mean, the whole thing unravels, because America is the biggest gamble in the historical timeline, if we're going with these principles of stolen history, because you have, Europe and China and all these things that, the new world is what they call America. That's the newest version of history and the biggest and the most impactful, the last 500 years. So it's critically important that if they made up a bunch of bullshit about America that long ago, that they got to keep it going. Because if you show that this was all a lie, then forget about the rest. I mean, the rest is all out the window at that point. So it is kind of like a cascading effect, or like a domino effect.
Yeah.
You start with one big lie, and then that leads to the next one. And I think the story is, I mean, in my opinion, just obviously this is what I spend the most time looking at, and this is what I've observed personally, because of that. I live here and I've been boots on the ground in a lot of these places. It's super important, and it's in the battleground, and the ground zero is here, kind of. I mean, in my opinion. Of course, I could be biased, because you talk to a Russian researcher and they're going to say the same thing about Russia. So
right. When you say like the ground zero, what do you mean by that? I mean, I think I know what you mean, but I would love to hear you explain it for us.
It's the battleground that stolen history will live or die on.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's there's so much to it, and there's so much garbage about it, that it's tough. It's really difficult. I mean, I was out at so I live near the Arkansas River in like central Arkansas.
Right.
And I finally got a chance to go check out, there's a site over in Oklahoma called Spiro Mounds. And
it's called what?
Spiro Mounds. So Spiro is the name of this place. And I would pull up pictures, but the reason I'm telling this story is because of how unimpressive and bad this site is. It's I don't know what I was expecting, but what I found was a museum full of replicas, a guy from the Oklahoma Historical Society who had his canned responses to questions, and the mounds were almost all also replicas and had been overgrown and unkept. Complete waste of time. But apparently I'm supposed to believe that this was the seat of power for the entire Native American and group that was here. And I'm not even necessarily discrediting that, but the state of the history in the mainstream is so poor, and so, I mean, it's underfunded, of course. What was actually interesting about specifically the Oklahoma Historical Society is they're the only historical society that are officially recognized by the Smithsonian.
Really? That is interesting.
Yes.
I wonder what the connection is there.
I think, if I may be so bold, the connection is that Oklahoma is a very important place in the covering up of the story of America. And it's so important that the Smithsonian has made sure that they're the ones controlling the message whenever you walk into one of these places. I asked the guy where the Giants' bones were. That was my one question.
Your one question,
Yeah, he didn't appreciate it. He's, well, there were no giants here, and they were all, they weren't really giants. They were like 5'8". And it's like, okay, yeah, well, the Osage were pretty big. I know about them. They were all like 6 foot, pretty big. It's like, and he was downplaying that even. It's like, not only did he not want to mention that there were, however many accounts of giant bones being found all over that place. I mean, wouldn't that be a fascinating conversation to have if you were the guy working at this place about all the actual reports? But they can't, because Smithsonian is the reason we don't have any of those giant bones anymore. They're the ones that got rid of all that shit back in the 1800s when they were getting started. It's crazy. Right. And they're all part of this same little club of people, of these, sort of, Cornell, or there were all these old school. Columbia was another one. A lot of them went to these colleges, and they would, all learn this is the way we're going to tell everyone how it is. And they would go out and they would do it. And Smithsonian was 100% part of that operation. Sure. Yeah. So yeah, it's there's so much to be found here, evidence that's been left, but it's been so twisted by these sorts of narratives and these people that have just been in these positions for so long. And of course, that's almost any country you're going to find that. In Egypt, you're going to find that too. In France, and in all these places, these gatekeepers are, but their narratives aren't that strong. That's the nice thing about it. Right. Is they don't really hold up to too much scrutiny, especially when you start talking about things that happened, what they say is 1800 BC or whatever. I mean, it's out the window at that point when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I think what really struck me when you said like America, the new world, right? And I'm thinking of the new world, the new world order, and the people who are behind this, I think who are behind hiding, that they would be the ones who have a lot invested in hiding so much of our history.
Yeah, the all the people that wrote these books and say in these universities, we're the New World Order at the time. The Dutch East India Company was the New World Order of the time. Yep. That there's always been a New World Order right around the corner. There's always been someone who wants to change how the order of the world goes. And, we have our versions now, which, we talked about last time. I don't really see this particular brand being as successful as the ones in the past. But certainly the colonial era that we're given, the mainstream version of it is very popular and very well executed. Whatever they ended up doing, there hasn't been anyone to come around and really start poking holes in it until relatively recently. Or of course, the other question people certainly bring up is, was this information provided to us in order to start talking about these concepts? Because that is also part of the reset, is to release almost like a disclosure,
right? Because
I didn't make the whole thing with Tartaria and mud floods, I wasn't the one who discovered that material for the first time. I wasn't the person who asked that question initially. I came on board relatively early in the process compared to most people, which is why I have the nuance of it, because I've seen it for a lot longer than most people. But I wasn't the one who came up with it. I don't know where it came from. I've never met the person who originally posted all that, or interesting material on the first stolen history. Right. There's certainly speculations as to whether or not it was, one person or a group of people, or, a team of researchers. Certainly that's been suggested for other research channels as well. Right. So it's hard.
Wait, you lost sound.
Sorry, I muted myself. If it is part of the reset, this is part of the reset. It's pretty clever.
Yeah,
it doesn't necessarily make it wrong.
Disinfo definitely exists, and we definitely know that they do use cognitive infiltration, so that it would be pretty clever. I was just going to say that I think that I don't know if we did go over this last time, but I kind of think that the people who are behind this reset are not like distantly related to, the same, I think it's kind of a thread, but yeah, that's just kind of my theory. I don't dispute that there's probably been multiple resets, and this is, another iteration of a different reset, but I don't think that the people behind it, I think they're just kind of executing the same plans. So
Yeah, and like I said, not doing it nearly as well.
yeah, exactly. Yes, that if you said that they're essentially like the lazy trust fund babies.
Yeah, I mean, the colonials, they didn't have to deal with the internet. England in 1700 didn't have to worry about the internet screwing their plans up. I mean, certainly word can travel around, but you kill enough generations of people between pushing them off their land and then sending them into wars. I mean, it doesn't take that long to eliminate, generational history. It really doesn't take that long.
Right.
We're not that far removed from it.
No.
And it's really hard to get a picture of it. It's hard to get a picture of stuff that happened in World War II. And a lot of us knew someone who was alive during, who, almost everyone who's listened to this has met someone at least who was alive, during that period of time. But there's still so little we understand about it.
Yeah.
And what at the highest level it meant for the development of humanity after this. If you really look at it, that reset.
Yeah.
If you wanted to put a date on, if you were to ask me what was the period of time that it took to reset the last population, and I would say it started in 1810 or 1811 and it ended in 1945.
Yeah, and so much happened, especially in this country in that time period.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you see it as sort of a combination of a global conflict mixed with the attempt at erasing as much history as possible in the process, it was a pretty successful run.
I think
so. And that's what, call that was 4 generations,
right?
130 years, give or take, period of time in the context of, however long we've been around. That's not that long.
Nothing. Yeah.
3 or 4 generations. And now, I mean, we have the internet and we have the ability to really dive into this in a way that nobody else has been. And it's still really hard to find information on all this stuff. I mean, it's hard to find information on stuff that happened 2 years ago.
Yeah.
This internet has gotten worse and worse for that kind of stuff. If you're not, making your own backups and archives of things, you're gonna lose a lot of internet that wasn't even that long ago, much less trying to find stuff that's, from 500 years ago.
Totally. Well, let's circle back to the technology and the free energy and the ancient tech. I think that stuff is really, really fascinating. And they would certainly have a lot invested in covering that up.
Yes, I agree. And I'll pull up some photos here, kind of, at the very least, we can take a look at some nice buildings while we're chatting. I mean, I know we get compliments on our smile and beards, but it's never a bad thing to look at some photos while we're talking too.
Great.
But anyway, the grid energy, alternative energy, starts with examining structures and the way that they work and the way that they're designed relative to how technology works and how alternative energy concepts work. So I'm just going to find an example here. And this is a post, a series on our site called The Lost Key, and it was written by this user Catalyst. So this is where I'm pulling the information and a lot of the images from.
Okay.
but this is probably the best example on the site of this principle being shown. So was your audience, do people understand what a toroid structure is?
I don't know. I mean, maybe let's just give a brief kind of.
Now, I will, first of all, I will
that.
preface this conversation
Yes.
by saying I am not a physicist, and I don't mean that in the sense of like, I'm not trying to say that only people who are educated in it can speak on it from like a university standpoint. I just mean like, I am not a technical person or an electrical engineer or have such a vast understanding of this that I'm going to bore you to death with with the details of how technology works, but I'm staying at a very general level here.
Yeah, you don't have to
which
give
is
us,
fine.
like,
I think
mathematical equations or anything.
Yeah, well, the reason I brought up a toroid is it's a shape, it's a system, it's very common in nature. So toroid would be like a donut shape, or like an apple would be a toroid because it has the two things in the center and it kind of folds down into it.
Right.
And we see a lot of these old structures, as you can see, with these unique dressings, if you'll call them. They call them weather vanes in the past, and to an extent, I mean, they sure would attract lightning. That actually may be part of the reason they're there in the first place. But they seem to be toroidal structures. And here's an example of energy flowing through a torus. There's a really Ken Wheeler. He has a YouTube channel. He has a lot of research that he's done on toroidal energy that is really fascinating. Again, a lot of it's way over my head, but the point that needs to be understood is that geometry is extremely important when it comes to energy.
And we don't need to jump into this now, but isn't that kind of the theory around some of the hollow earth theory about the poles? And
that the earth is a toroid or toroidal structure and has it certainly could be. Earth shape is not something I look into too much. I have my favorites, of course. I am a toroidal hollow earth fan personally. I think that it's certainly compelling and would certainly fit a model that accommodates for this type of planet to exist, or the civilization to exist alongside the technology.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, I would certainly entertain that idea. Yeah, for sure. I'd love to go there one day, or maybe that's not a place to go. I don't know. Maybe it's just a giant sucking, electromagnetic vortex that you don't really want to have anything to do with. But suffice it to say,
well, we can dive into that a little bit when we get to, because I am curious some of your thoughts on that. And how the energy flows, because I mean, Antarctica alone seems to be pretty hidden. They keep it quite secret. You need clearance to get there. And
exactly. So you look at the geometric patterns of these buildings and you start to piece together a narrative which doesn't really add up to the level. And of course, they're beautiful. Like I said, they're never not beautiful.
They are beautiful.
But they're always made of certain materials. And I will also point out a lot of these structures have these sort of, what looks like bell towers, but they're never filled. They always look empty. It's always interesting how it looks like there's something that should go inside of these objects, but there's never actually anything inside, like something up here, for example. And, there's some evidence of older photos that appear to have something inside of them. And the speculation there is that they contain some sort of mercurial substance, like a mercurial etheric substance that provided, again, a form of power. So these toroids and these sacred geometrical shapes and these common themes you start to see in these structures all over the world. And you have to start asking the question of why are all these, sort of natural principles being used in this architecture.
Right.
So things like crystals can be used to focus energy.
Sure.
And certainly things like that in combination with etheric energy or energy that exists naturally because we live in an ether universe, there's no such thing as space and an ether or a void of space. The etheric universe is alive with energy. That's that principle that Tesla talks about.
Right.
And being able to tap into this energy is part of why these structures have the ability to, potentially provide a power or an energy using architecture and using these structures as technology.
Wow.
You'll find a lot of times that these dome structures are the first thing to be taken down when these buildings, sometimes when they're renovating buildings, they'll just take these down. Like the domes and the towers are always the things that are changed the most frequently. The base of the structure will stick around, but it's not uncommon for you to look up, like let's say you were to find a building in your town that you were interested in that looked a lot like this, and you were to find old photos like pre-1880, there's a strong chance the towers look different than they do now. And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, the knowledge that there was leftover pieces of this evidence left in these structures that when they were clearing them out for the new world, they had to get rid of. And I'm not saying that they were working, but there was certainly evidence left, and evidence has to be destroyed in this case. The exotic metals, well, not exotic per se, but copper domes and bronze domes, these huge metal domes, and bells too. Was a bell originally designed to have a hunchback go and pull on a rope and make ring the bells to church, or were they used for something else at a different point? There's examples of these bells. I forget what they're called in Japan. There's a Japanese bell. You find them all over the place. These like sort of ancient bells, but I can't remember the name off the top of my head. But yeah, and here's this is the Kremlin bell in Moscow. So I mean, you can see just how massive these things were.
I mean, it looks like a building essentially.
Yeah, and it's these they're feet thick. And I mean, you have to think these were constructed in a time before they had these, modern cranes and things like that. So somehow they were able to hoist these things all the way up to the tops of these towers and set them up.
Wow.
So again, are these originally actually used for ringing a church bell, or did they have some other purpose?
What are the theories of some other purposes it could have had?
Well, light, for one. I mean, if you were able to, you can very easily light up a city with this kind of technology. You could also potentially I mean, you talk about things with water and principles of water. You could purify water. You could distill water. You could create, wireless energy. You could create, all these. Again, it's so difficult for us to comprehend this stuff because we've never known a world that didn't involve plugging something into a wall. And I know that we talk about these alternative principles a lot, but it's still very hard for us to wrap our minds around the possibilities that this type of energy could create.
Well, they did have water powered cars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that we know of. So
and steam was a great mode of transportation, and electric vehicles. I mean, it's I think we just or are about to release. We've been going through, and one of the guys on our site, Armoro, has been going through some older posts and like archived threads, and he's been creating some short videos around them. I know one of them that we're about to, like I said, it's either coming out or will come out soon, is one on the amount of electric vehicles and how fast these things were going. I mean, they were like breaking land records that were going, hundreds and hundreds of miles an hour, these electric vehicles from like 120 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, that is that's a whole, I mean, that I'm sure we got into it last time with the rise of the oil oligarchy and all that, suppression of alternative technology, and things like airships and the Hindenburg and all that stuff that we covered last time. It's all part of it. I mean, it's all part of this, but how the energy actually was utilized,
right?
Like I said, we can make some fair assessments.
Mm-hmm.
Travel, light, electricity, food preparation, potentially, all kinds of things. But there may have been, again, some more that we just have a hard time comprehending. I think about these huge, these Gothic cathedrals, and these churches that were built, a few hundred years ago, and the design of them, and they have these big organs on the inside of them, but these beautiful organs that they play beautiful music, and they saturate the church with this powerful music. And I wonder to myself, if you had some kind of, and this is my stoner brain, just turning on and trying to imagine, this sort of like steampunk fantasy. It's people aren't, it's not a religious experience, but you're going to these places, and the way that the organ is played, that's making the structure around you resonate, combined with the water underneath and the tunnels that are flowing underneath the church. This energy is seeping its way into the ground and into the water, and energizing the water, and the people that are inside are receiving sort of energy. And again, I can't prove it. I don't have the receipts on that, but I have imagination, and I have speculation, and I see things like what we just went over, and I'm, it's easy to imagine the potential benefits that this, even just if we're wrong, just the idea of thinking about it in the first place, it's a noble idea. The idea that we don't have to rely on plugging cell phones in and charging them up, and having these black mirrors follow us around. This technological world we've created for ourselves is dystopian, sort of trap. And there, to think that there may have been an alternative so recently in the past is certainly tempting, but it also can lead to a lot of daydreaming and fantasies.
Right.
So I can't sit here and prove to you that these buildings were used as healing centers, and I can't prove that star forts and star cities were a form of energy and power and things like that, but I would certainly make the case.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great segue. Let's dive into star forts a little bit more, and how could they be a healing center, or harnessing power?
So star forts, and we'll kind of back up in the sense of giving the mainstream explanation first, and then
start there.
So I'll show you. This is an example of a star fort. Pretty standard. Star forts are called bastion forts. If you go to Wikipedia and look up list of bastion forts, you'll be first of all surprised to find just how many of them there are, and how many different places they're in.
Right.
Starforts.com, starforts.org. I always forget, but they're actually they're unaffiliated with the site. I know, if not one of them, but someone who works with them and has uploaded stuff to starforts.com, has a growing and expanding list of where these are located all over the world. Yeah, starforts.com. So the official explanation is these were military bastions that were popularized in the time of siege warfare. So that would be like the 1500s, really more like the 1700s, up until Civil War, like late 1800s. It kind of fell out of favor, or fell out of fashion at that point. So again, in that sort of muddy period of history. But the mainstream explanation is, there was no need to, once airships, they started flying airplanes and doing aerial bombing, the need to build bastions like this, or use bastions to cover yourself from enemy fire is kind of worthless. Yeah. But there's all these ones all over the place. They're in Europe, they're in Asia, they're in Siberia, they're in Canada, they're in North America, they're all over the world.
Right.
And they are typically, what you'll find is they're built, generally near a body of water.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it's like where two rivers cross, or a river meets a lake, some kind of important, arguably strategic area.
Sure.
But what you'll find is the level of design that has gone into them is very impressive.
Yeah, I mean they're stunning.
Here's one of my favorites. The Statue of Liberty is actually built on top of a star fort.
Wow.
And there's several more star forts out in the bay over there. There's a ton of star forts in New York City. St. Petersburg has a lot too. But yeah, the Statue of Liberty is built on top of one.
Wow.
So you start looking at these structures, and of course the natural questions come up.
Uh-huh.
Why would you build something like this?
Right.
Is it true? Is it really that important to have this type of fortification in the event of a siege? Certainly, these are very easy to defend bastions. I wouldn't make the argument that these are not good for holding up against an enemy who is attempting to, get over into your army and kill your army.
Right.
I'm not denying that at all. However, I do take issue with the level of complexity that are involved in the construction of these relative to, these people are supposed to be fighting a war.
It's so intricate. That looks like it would require so much to do.
And you have these people who are in the middle of these wars who apparently have nothing better to do than construct these. Of course, the timelines for these are all, ridiculous. It takes them way too fast to put these up. No big deal. But go back to, the conversation we just finished.
Mm-hmm.
What could you do with water and earth in a geometric shape? What would that affect in your environment? Right. Would it affect the way plants grow? Would it affect the quality of the water that people are consuming? You have to think too, for everything you see above ground, we're not seeing what's below ground.
Right.
and the intricate networks of tunnels and who knows what was down there.
Right.
So you combine, and I will say that there are people who have, you know, attempted to go down into some of these
Yeah. Can
places.
ask.
And this one's I think it's Palma Nova, in Italy. This
Okay.
particular one, and this is an image someone put together, again, kind of demonstrating this idea of a network of an alternative energy system that was used in the past. Another thing that is worth noting, you go to the Netherlands and they have, like, if you go to the list of bastion forts on there, and you find the section for the Netherlands, and you open it up, you almost need a second page just to get through all of them. I mean, there's so many in the Netherlands. And what's really interesting about them is not only are there all these forts, but there's all of these canals that are connecting them to each other.
Wow. Yeah.
And so you can go on Google Earth and, like, find a city in the Netherlands. It's a Star Fort city, and you can go and you can just start tracing a canal, right? And start tracing a canal to your heart's content, and it's going to lead you into another city. And it's you're just going to be able to keep repeating that. And what's interesting about the Netherlands specifically, and the reason they still have all this infrastructure left, I don't think I mentioned this on the last show. The Dutch were spared their infrastructure. If you'll notice, the Netherlands has a lot of old infrastructure left, and the canal systems and all this stuff. They were never destroyed during the world wars. Now you ask yourself, that's interesting. Why weren't they?
Yeah.
Well, turns out the Dutch royal family had a factory. And in that factory, they made a product. And that product was cocaine and methamphetamines.
That's right. Yeah.
And the Dutch were supplying all of the drugs to the soldiers in the world wars. So they were spared. Because, and it was, like I said, it was the royal family it was a royal cocaine factory.
Yeah.
So they were untouchable. So that's why it's really interesting to go and look at the Netherlands specifically, because they were spared a lot of this.
Wow.
So you can go on Google Earth, and trace front to back and go through all these fun little cities, and they're all connected by these canal systems. And I don't think that's specific to the Netherlands.
Right.
I think it was indicative of a greater system that existed outside of this area, but had since been destroyed. Now, when it comes to, or let me rephrase that. The obvious counter to this is, well, they were just military purposes. Obviously these were for military purposes. However, what people don't realize is there's another level to star forts, and that are star cities.
Right.
So this is Hamburg in 1771. You can see that the entire city is surrounded with this type of infrastructure. And you can also see the river coming through here. And this is Amsterdam. This is in the Netherlands. I mean, you can see just the level of detail and engineering that went into, I mean, keep in mind too, Amsterdam's below sea level.
Yeah.
And they were able to not only have a city that existed below sea level, they were able to have this much infrastructure on top of all of that.
Yeah, it's so intricate.
Yeah, and this is, again, this is not specific to, and this is one you can, of the remnants of what was originally a star city, and you can see just how large of an area that is. I mean, that's an entire city in and of itself.
Yeah.
This is another one, I believe, in Germany. And again, the level of detail. Here's another interesting question. When you look at these photos that maybe people haven't even wrapped their mind around yet, how were these drawn? How did you draw a map like this?
Right, like
in the 1700s?
Yeah, how would they have, and how would they have had an aerial perspective of it?
Exactly. So again, there's all these detailed, not only are these insanely detailed cities and structures, but
And
then
these
also
are
the
above
question is
ground?
raised of, sorry?
These are above ground?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah,
This is Dresden, Germany. And again, you can see that the features of the Star City, it's on a river, the river's flowing, and you have these channels that feed into, all this stuff. These were considered moats, right? That's what they call this stuff when you learn about, it just had a big moat around it. It was to stop people. And that's what they say about all the different points. The points are there so that you can set up more cannons and have more firing angles. Because again, I know how this kind of stuff goes. There's going to be 50 YouTube comments trying to debunk and say that, oh no, this was for all. I'm a military historian. They used this for all. This was maximizing as many firing angles as possible. I have found a book that was written in this period of time in the 1700s. I don't have the name of it in front of me. It's called Elements of Field Fortification, but I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head. But he goes into this, and what he determines, because again, this guy's a general who's actually fighting in siege warfare in this period of time,
right?
And what he was writing about is how these angles don't really give the advantage relative to the complexity of their design. So what he's basically saying is the amount of time it takes for you to build a four-sided structure is better because you're going to build it faster, and it only, like the amount, you add 8 sides to a structure instead of 4, it only ever so slightly raises that advantage. It's not at a level that's worth the amount of time that it takes.
So I'm sorry, what would the reason for doing this be? What are some of the theories around that?
Why they were constructed like this?
Yeah, I mean, if it's really not much of a militaristic advantage, then why would they utilize so many resources and so much time doing that?
Right. And what's equally as impressive as, what all these would have been, which are, stone walls and things like that, is again the terraforming of the earth and the mounds and the water flowing through it. It seems like this is more of an infrastructure, a public works or energetic, these follow the same kind of energetic principles we see in how these are designed. You have the sacred geometry, you have the water flowing, and again, Wilhelm Reich is a great person to research on the scientific studies he did on water and vortex energy and all these types of things. The temperature of water and how important that is for the growth of life. There were reports of when colonial people came over to the New World, how the Native Americans had sort of biohacked their environment. And they were able to, they had these areas they could just walk over to, and these rivers where there'd be so many fish, you could practically walk from one side of the river to the other, because they understood the natural principles and how to, get more out of your environment and how to make your environment work for you in a way that our society has no idea how to do. We've lost a lot of those, like, the technology that Native Americans used to clear forests and provide, that kind of like that burn, the way that they used to burn forests to keep them healthy. Those techniques are are lost or are in the process of almost being lost today.
Totally.
You know, there are certainly controlled burns, but they're not done the way that they used to be. I think it's a misnomer to think of, you know, this period of time, you know, these forests that you would see would probably not be like forests we see today. They would probably be a lot less, a lot better kept. You know, the bush in Australia was not really the bush until, you know, colonial, you know, New World Order types settled on their land and removed them from their, you know, their grounds and let these places become overrun. And so now after 200 years, you have the bush in Australia, this sort of like impassable, difficult to navigate, intense, you know, forests. And it's similar in America. You have these areas that are these extremely wild, you know, hard to move through areas. And I think in the past, you wouldn't have seen that nearly as much. I think these people, this former civilization, you know, they understood how these principles worked, and they were able to make things work to their advantage. And, you know, maybe that wasn't the case by the time these people who drew these maps showed up. I mean, I'm not saying that the same people who got up in these hot air balloons, because let's be honest, that's probably what they did. So to think that people didn't understand the concept of balloon technology back then, look at one of these maps and realize they understood flight, regardless of where you stand on advanced technology or not. Understand that these people had technology that you wouldn't have thought they did far before they, you know, you would think they did.
Sure.
So I'm not saying that these are necessarily the same people. I'm not even necessarily saying the people who built the cities inside of these are necessarily the same civilization that built the structures underneath, the canals, the earth. So I don't know. I mean, again, it's obviously a bit of a stretch, but honestly, you know, how many of these have I shown? You know, maybe 15 to 20 cities, and this isn't anywhere near the total amount of these cities that were on the planet at any given point. And how many of these actually still exist today? Very little. The one that's my background behind me is Japan, by the way. This is a Japanese star fortress area. So yeah, it's a mystery in the sense that we don't really understand exactly how these things were built to the level. Like, you could understand star forts.
Right.
You can understand star forts in the context of having a mainstream reason to exist. I'm not necessarily discrediting that. I think, but again, I think in a lot of situations, it wasn't the structure that was original to the area. It was the channels and the earth and all that was original to the area, that had since been built over. Because you look at something like that, and somebody who's military minded, because let's be honest, most of these people were these generals and these people, you know, going around and determining what the new world was going to be like. They that's the first thing their mind goes to, is they see something like that and say, yeah, I could do that. You know, the author of that book, The Elements of Field Fortification, says that star forts, anything above like 4-sided forts, is basically just some sort of like French fancy, that they're like, oh, the French were just like really like into this, and the Americans just kind of copied the French. That's basically what the explanation is. But again, like there's one, I think in, I don't know if it's Sudan, that's like dated to 1000 BC or something like that. I mean, there's evidence of these structures much older than whenever we would have had to have used cannons in warfare, because that's not something that was, you know, that long ago. But there's a lot of these structures that predate cannons. So I don't know. It just seems like a little bit too convenient of a story, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you said that there are some people who have gone under the star forts, and what were they finding?
So there's a YouTube channel. His name is Paul Cook.
Okay.
and he goes down into Malta. Now, Malta is a island
Okay.
off the coast of France. Hang on, I'll pull some stuff up here. So Malta is a island off the coast of France that is essentially off the coast of Italy. So this is kind of where it is right here. So it's off the coast of Italy, and it's essentially 3 or 4 star cities, all on top of each other. And the reason I say that is, they have also, like you can see right here is a perfect example of the former infrastructure of the star city here. So you see these bastions here on the corner, but basically the entire city, the entire island is like this and has this construction. And so Paul used to live there. So he travels out there and basically just gets into places he probably shouldn't. And shout out to him. I've shouted him out a couple of times. I've interacted with him, I think once before. He's a nice dude. I'd love to talk to him further about what he's found, but he's gone down in there and he's really shown that they say that there were some of these areas that were like carved out for bunkers in World War II, but the level to which they're underneath these massive, inside these huge brick structure, and this stuff looks so old. I mean, they say it looks ancient, and it has the engineering levels of something equivalent to the pyramids. I mean, it's not certainly not quite as impactful as the pyramids, but just from an engineering standpoint, it's baffling how much work went into having to construct an entire island that was this city. And it's truly eye-opening when you start to see like the expanse to which this exists. And again, what are these places full of? They're full of those large exotic material structures with these large towers with this interesting way that potentially these bells or these energetic towers or whatever in the middle of these cities. And when you start to kind of synthesize all of that, you start to get a bigger picture of what we're talking about here, that there was a global civilization that had access to technology that doesn't operate on our version of it, the version the controllers made for us. It's completely incompatible. Doesn't mean it's necessarily advanced per se. I mean, it's kind of like it's just another way, right? It's a more harmonious way of getting similar results to the things that we have in our society.
It's working more with the earth is what it seems like, as opposed to a lot of what the technology that we use today is, goes against, it's harmful to the earth and to the inhabitants, including us. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, stuff now, notice these things aren't made of wood either, right? So I mean, they're not chopping down a bunch of trees. Now they are quarrying, certainly, and obviously the question of that is raised too, of the question of logistics of like, where were these quarries that they were getting this stuff from? How much all of this stuff has to come from somewhere,
right?
So how was it being constructed? Where were they getting all this material from? But yeah, it's not an easy task, and there's more to it than just seeing it as military.
Yeah,
in my opinion. I mean, the military industrial complex, it is the thing America spends the most money on by far. I mean, it's certainly conceivable that back then they also spent a considerable amount of money on military resources on their military prowess, but
it's probably also similar to now, where the military industrial complex isn't really just serving as a defense. There's a lot of
right. because they do. I mean, they're, how I'm sure you've had guests talk about, deep underground military bases and, things like that, that are, our generation of the military industrial complex is built out, or at the very least, renovated, could have certainly been, a former, left. A lot of these could have been leftovers from an ancient, advanced civilization, and we just kind of tapped into some of those tunnels and things like that. So, it's hard to say, but certainly there's some weird stuff. If we're going into stolen history, but in a little bit more of a modern context, I have kind of not a personal anecdote, but just, again, living in these certain places. I lived on a town in North Texas that was on the 33rd parallel.
Okay.
And on the 33rd parallel is FEMA Region 6 headquarters. And, obviously, do I need to necessarily go into why FEMA is considered a spooky organization to your listeners? I don't know. Maybe not. Certainly they were, back in the day, they were certainly a popular topic in the alternative crowds as to what they really had going on. But suffice it to say that the FEMA Region 6 headquarters is there. And I know that there's underground infrastructure because, FEMA Region 6 is allegedly where George Bush went after 9/11. They took him there because it's one of those continuance of governance sites. So it has underground infrastructure to be able to run the country. I've met people that have worked at those places. All they've really divulged to me is that, there's like 3 stories under there. I'm like, yeah, well, you're not that important. No offense. The people that I was dealing with, weren't exactly high up members.
They didn't have top clearance.
No, certainly not. So, they got told what they got told. And they have access to the places they have access to, but certainly, there's more to it. And in that same town, there was also a missile base that was closed in the 50s. So it was like, shut down after World War II. But again, this missile base had all these tunnels going underneath. And so, the theory, the word around town is, there are still entrances to these tunnels, and they are still used to, do whatever nefarious things people would do with underground tunnels, whether, again, that's from a military standpoint, secret operations, for something more subversive, like an intelligence operation, trafficking, things of that nature. I mean, certainly I heard my fair share of local anecdotes around those types of things, and grooming, and, people disappearing or getting involved in the wrong crowds. I don't think that's unique to that area by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
But yeah, so, I mean, you have these, underground tunnels and things like that. Also, in particular, that FEMA Region 6 was designed by Mormons. As a Mormon family who built it. And I don't remember exactly how much we got into the Mormons last time, but, they're certainly an interesting group, and they're an interesting group that keeps its secrets, and is usually pretty well rewarded for being, noted for keeping secrets very well. And because they've hid their own history from everyone for a long time.
Right.
So yeah, it's one of those things where you start to understand kind of how this, you examine the past, the far past, and you kind of start seeing these patterns emerge, and then you start applying it to things that are more recent, or things that you've encountered personally, and you start expanding out and seeing these same patterns and these same groups of people being involved with military applications, and the adaptation of potentially old infrastructure being used for modern, applications, secretive applications. So yeah, it's very inverted. It's the same thing they did in the past. They turned it all into weapons of war, and they turned all this potentially old stuff into horrible stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, today a lot of the weapons of war are unfortunately just not used in defense. They're weaponized against people. So it's really more like,
Exactly.
yeah. But that's probably a good segue to the underground cities.
Yeah, I was actually going to pull up a photo of we were talking about the Mormons.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This is one of my favorite. This is the temple, the Mormon temple, the big one in Salt Lake City. So they've done renovations on it, and so people have gotten images of what the underground area underneath this temple is.
Right.
And you can see, again, the idea of that sort of, the mud flood thing, which we talked about on the last episode, the unintentional burying of structures from some sort of event, whether it was natural or weapon based. We're not really sure or how it was caused. But the point is you see these sort of half buried windows. That's pretty common. But then also on top of that, you see how it looks like these stairs were built at a later time, because there was an entrance that continued down under here with the original. And then of course you have this foundation, and you see these guys are down here. So it goes quite a ways underneath, and they did when they were building it, they did say they have a lot of connections with that area being Temple of Solomon. So of course the speculation is, did they really build on top of a former ancient temple, and if so, was it Temple of Solomon? I don't know, certainly, but I think that at the very least evidence points to they did build it on top of a pre-existing structure. And there's John Levi has a YouTube channel. He's done a ton of videos. He's a fairly popular alternative history YouTube personality.
Okay.
And he's done another, he did a boots on the ground because he lives kind of close to that area, and he kind of went and asked around that Salt Lake City area and that temple, and it was undergoing renovation at the time. I believe I read an article that said that they were actually taking some of the towers down from the building, which again is a surprise. Wow. But he was saying that there were people talking about how there were just more and more and more floors underneath. I mean, it just keeps going and going and going. Like there's really truly, I think, something quite incredible under there.
Wow.
I don't know if you saw the article that came out a couple of weeks ago. They found that sarcophagus under the Notre Dame. Did you hear about that?
I did. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and they're saying, well, of course, you know what they're saying. They're saying, well, it was Middle Ages sarcophagus. Like, okay, whatever. The typical story. There was also another one. Let's see if I can pull that one up. They found another underground city in Turkey, or they had a press release about it, I should say.
Okay.
Yeah. So here, this came out earlier this week. That they found this massive underground structure in southeast Turkey, and they estimate that they think 60 to 70,000 people. It's in the town of Midyat. Wow. They speculate that 60 to 70,000 people could fit in there, and of course they immediately the museum guy, I forget his name, like Tarkov or something. Okay. Wow. And again, they say that's the Star of David. I don't think that's actually the Star of David.
It doesn't look like the Star of David at all. Not even
that's
close.
The first time I'm seeing that image. That's it says right here there. Man,
that's funny.
Yeah, this is the level of archaeology and more specifically archaeological journalism that we're dealing with in the modern day, is taking a look at this. What is this 8-pointed star, and saying it's a Star of David.
It's very odd. I don't know why someone would even say that. It doesn't look like it at all.
Well, so the whole thing is that they say that it was a place for Christians and Jews to escape persecution. That's what they were saying that was used for.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, and again, it's like, this is a fairly large area, certainly a decent sized city.
Sure.
But I mean, certainly in this period of time, whatever they're referring to, 2000 years ago or whatever, it was like AD 600, I think. I don't know. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You'd think that the people that were in charge would notice 60 to 70,000 people disappearing under their city to pray on Sunday. I mean, what was the city like on Sundays? They're all down there in church on a Sunday, and nobody's out on the streets.
Well,
like
if it's Christians and Jews, don't they observe on different days? Although I think
right, but again,
Christians
like
used to observe on Saturday. I don't know, but
yeah, the explanations that they give, it's like on a level that people just want to read a headline and feel like they've accomplished something. It's great because they can look at that. And of course, most of the, information you see from this is from like, religious type of publications that are talking about this.
Sure.
It's used as this way of like, I don't know if it's like, reminding, they want people to think about religious persecution in the past and,
sure.
Whether, however they want that to be structured. And of course, revealing the truth in order to boost tourism. I think a lot of these countries are becoming desperate.
Oh, yeah.
And they're willing to show things like this. I'm just going to make a guess and say they probably didn't just figure out that there was this much infrastructure under the city, considering how old the city is and how many people have probably been working on, uncovering archaeological evidence from a city like this. You'd think it would have come up before now. So, why now? Why just choose to reveal it now? And again, obviously, tourism's down, probably global right now, just because of, lockdowns and things like that. And so a lot of these countries are doing pretty poorly, especially a country like Turkey, does have a lot of tourism.
Yeah.
They have a lot of famous areas that, people travel for. Maybe they're just trying to, get things going again. And the way they do it is they're willing to, talk about things like this and open themselves, I suppose they're just taking the risk, assuming that people like us don't reach a point where we're having a big enough platform to say, hey, I don't think so. Star David,
right? It's something.
Star David, excuse me.
Yeah, that's odd. I mean, yeah, that's just really, really odd. So I don't know what it is, but it definitely doesn't.
And that's the Wall Street Journal, by the way.
Oh, was it?
This is the Wall Street Journal. This is from 4 hours ago, actually. So yeah, this is all. So this is a fresh article. So they really are trying to sell, because this came out. Yeah, it was about 4 or 5 days ago that I originally read this.
Right.
So they just released that with a bunch of photos that I hadn't seen yet. So yeah, it's interesting that they're really trying to make sure, like, they said at the beginning, this museum guy was like, oh yeah, it's for religious persecution. And, 4 days later, the Wall Street Journal is having to support that by like, well, what can we do to show people that has to do with religion? Oh, here's a star. Let's just say it's the Star of David. These idiot Christians don't know that the Star of David is a 5-point. No, they don't care.
Yeah, I would think they would, actually.
Oh, I'm sure they would. And again, whether or not, this is only 4 hours ago. So they're still, of course, they're never the type of people that are going to retract what they say,
right?
No matter what. But, the question obviously is, because, Göbekli Tepe is also in Turkey. Mm-hmm. And you have this kind of history of like buried ancient infrastructure, underground infrastructure in these areas. Right. And, these questions keep coming up, like why did they build underground?
Yeah.
And, and it's relatively sparse too. We're not talking about, this grand style of architecture on the interior of these places either. I mean, we're, you know what I mean? Like they're very utilitarian.
Yeah.
They're very Spartan, they're very simple. They're, a lot of tunnels drilled through miles and miles of, with little rooms and things. Like, it could have absolutely been a place for people to wait something out.
Sure.
For a period of time. Did these people understand more about the planet and potentially knew that there was a possibility that, at any time, these events can happen, these cataclysms can happen, and they knew that the last thing, and that their passed down traditions say, if this shit starts off, you need to hide underground. Somebody told them, hey, it's going to be a really good idea. Just, I know you're building all these beautiful mosques and walls and, all this stuff, but at the same time, you also need to be building underground. And I think in a lot of ways, it could have absolutely been some way to protect themselves, whether that's an electromagnetic event, going back into that sort of, etheric, sort of plasma universe. That's the Thunderbolts project. I don't know if you're familiar with like the electric universe theory and the Thunderbolts project and all that. That's a really interesting rabbit hole. There's a YouTube channel, I think it's called Thunderbolts Project.
Okay.
And they've got videos that go back. I mean, I think I watched the first like ancient symbols in the sky, or symbols of an ancient sky. I think I watched that documentary back in 2014. I mean, it's they've been around for a long time.
Right.
And they have a lot of, I don't want to overgeneralize their work, but in effect they believe that the past looked a lot different. The planets were these electromagnetic objects in the sky that were much closer to Earth, and there was a cataclysm that caused the planets, these etheric entities, to sort of split off and go into the orbit that they're currently in. And a lot of these cave paintings and symbols that the ancient world had match up with electromagnetic, like plasma physics and things that you discover when you're doing plasma physics, the shape of plasma when you expose it to certain frequencies or certain temperatures. So there is this, this possibility that we live in a very volatile planet where things like that can happen. So they say things like the Grand Canyon was not created from water erosion. It was created from this event that caused like a scarring of the planet. Like, have you ever seen someone do like wood burning? And they kind of get those fractal patterns in the wood when you kind of when you electrify wood, and you can see it, like lightning strikes that hit trees. You have these really like ornate fractal patterns that come out of something like that. So this is the kind of thing that we look at when we see evidence of electromagnetic events. Matter of fact, that also kind of ties into the star forts a little bit too, with the cymatics and the idea of fractals. So like a fractal is a geometric pattern. Again, this is something that can be replicated. I forget what this device is called, but you can see that these designs are representative of electromagnetic frequencies and fractals that exist in nature. Cymatics is, the vibration, sound vibration can cause these shapes to be created. That those famous experiments with, and I forget his name off the top of my head, but he did all those experiments with water and exposing them to like happy music and sad, the vibrations, the good vibration. That's kind of the same thing what we're talking about here. So like a frequency played at a specific, something played at a specific frequency can create these patterns in the environment. And these these are what's called fractals. And again, you wonder, and you take a look at these, the snowflake is a fractal pattern.
Yeah.
But then also fractal antennas are a thing. So fractal antennas are like, so here's a pattern of one, right? So this is a fractal antenna. Basically, it's a way of creating an antenna that allows you to have more surface area of an antenna in a smaller space. That's what these are designed to do. So you'll see this very commonly in computer chip design, in motherboards and things like that, are these fractal designs for these things. And then you look at the star forts, which we looked at earlier in the star cities. And again, you start to connect these dots. Why are there all these fractal patterns and these things emerging from the style of architecture?
Right.
Why are there, what was the exist? How did this, system work? How did this ancient energy grid system work? And you take a look at these star cities and you see the fractal patterns, and you begin to get a bigger picture of what we're discussing here, which is, these cities were antennas for some sort of, energy. And I know we got way off the topic of underground cities on that one, but I promise it is all related. Specifically, though, I know you mentioned you had, did you actually go in some of the underground city stuff?
I didn't actually go.
Traveling through?
We just saw like the entrance and like some of the exits. And
the stuff in America is a little less, it's far more unusual than the stuff in like Turkey, for example, right? So we, underground cities in Turkey, they're again very Spartan, very, very simple. But then when you go and you look at the underground stuff in America, it's literally like
a city,
like a saloon door and some old, benches and tables and, an old, home underneath the city. It's totally different. It's a totally different thing. I mean, equally baffling. An equally ridiculous explanation. I mean, I guess I at least don't claim that it was used to escape religious persecution, which is a start. They seem to blame it on. They were clever enough to build these magnificently huge etheric energy structures, but they weren't smart enough to the civil engineering to figure out that the roads that they built them to connect with are really shitty, and they had to just like fill the road with 20 foot of dirt and build a new street on top of it. And that's why you have all these cities underground, essentially. But again, I find it hard to believe. I find it hard to believe that these people are so calculated and so smart and so technologically advanced that they would not understand how to build these structures in a way that wouldn't require them to fill the first floor completely with soil and build another road on top of it because they didn't do it right the first time.
Right.
I don't know.
That doesn't quite make much sense at all. So I'm curious. I had watched a video on Hollow Earth, and they said they were talking about the correlation of the underground cities and how that like supports the Hollow Earth theory. And they talked about giants and dinosaurs and whatnot. Are you familiar with all that? Yeah,
I am. There's a story that I found on the internet of a town near me in Diamond Crater State Park, near Diamond Crater State Park, that talks about the entrance to Hollow Earth in a cave somewhere near there, and talks about like the blue people down there and their friends stay behind or something. I don't remember exactly the story, but I mean, like I said, I certainly am open to a lot of that. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say dinosaurs, but I mean, I'd certainly be willing to say that the concept of like hidden worlds outside of the realm that we understand, whether that ends up being, looping back inside the earth, or just we're on a larger planet than we think, and there's
Mm.
more land out there than we think. And that's like again, I don't want to shoehorn it into any one theory, because
Sure.
again, there's all these people that have all these different camps that they sit in when it comes to earth shape and earth theory. That's
Right.
like, I mentioned one thing, and then I'm people would say, oh, you're this or whatever. Like, I
Right,
don't,
right.
it is what it is. But these lands outside of the continents that we understand, whether there's a secret access to it in Antarctica, or you have to go through the center of the earth or whatever to get there, I don't know. It would certainly make the idea of extraterrestrial and advanced and like off-world life be more compelling if they were actually coming from a different part of the planet we don't have access to normally,
Yeah,
versus
that was
them
the
coming
theory
from
as well.
space. And I
Yeah.
don't really know what, like I said, I'm I don't ascribe to any particular model, but I certainly have my questions about what space is and what stars are and what planets are. I don't think that it's exactly what we're being told. Certainly not the moon, and then again, from there, what else is fake about space? If they've lied that much about the moon, what else are they lying about in space? So, I'm not even willing to say that space is what it is, to say that extraterrestrials are coming from outer space. I don't even know what outer space is, but it's certainly possible that they, live in areas of the planet that are inaccessible to us, or that we haven't discovered, or that maybe only a few people have ever found. Maybe they have never come back. I don't know. I mean, there's never been a person who's claimed to go there and back. I mean, Admiral Byrd is probably the closest.
The close, yeah.
Who would have maybe made that claim, but even then, I mean, I don't think he actually explicitly says that he traveled inside, if I recall correctly. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've looked at the Admiral Byrd stuff.
Yeah, I thought he did say that he traveled inside, but maybe
I know he said that I know that he fought. He said he fought Germans up there, and they were protecting something, but I don't remember if he specifically said that. And certainly, whatever footage is out there is either not exactly what they're saying it is, or it's hoaxed footage. I don't think there's actually like footage of them. I've seen things claimed to have been footage of the Byrd expedition that show evidence of that, but I'm not really sure. Again,
but not confirmed. So like claimed, but not confirmed.
Right. I'm totally open to it. I mean, Antarctica is something, I certainly can't even begin to.
I have a lot of questions about Antarctica.
Yeah, too many. I mean, frankly, it's just, it's, and maybe I was wrong. Maybe the Russians are wrong. Maybe Antarctica is ground zero for the stolen history of the planet. Because I mean, you can certainly make that case too. I mean, we know so little about it. You can describe basically anything you want to it at this point, but
well, I mean, it's the toroidal energy theory that if they're the, so again, just like if the hollow earth theory has any merit, part of that theory is that through the poles, the energy is circulating, right? So it creates this electromagnetic field. So if we were to have more access to it, then that would probably open up a lot of at least questions for people that they don't really want us asking.
Right. And I think you're onto something there, in the sense that there has certainly been a lot of discussion as to why we wouldn't be able to necessarily tap into this in the way that they used to. And the speculation being that some sort of earth change, whether that's a pole shift or a cataclysm or whatever, I mean, any number of things that changes to the electromagnetic field basically lowered the amount of electricalness of the environment, of our environment. They say that there was, they say that back in the dinosaur times, there was so much more oxygen in the air, and all, that's why you had all these, massive creatures and massive plants and things like that. So I mean, in the mainstream, they'll admit that the Earth's atmosphere has fluctuated over the years. So
Sure.
I mean, there is a set amount of charge, whatever you want to call it, in the environment, but that may not have always been the same number or amount,
Right.
even 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
Right.
So is it even possible to start up, quote unquote, start up this old technology again, if it requires an environment that needs more charge or needs more energy, and we are living in a lower energies type of environment? And again, that's, you got to think of the interference in our societies too, whether that's, whatever waves are going through for, your cell phone, 4G, 5G, 3G, whatever,
Right.
radio waves, microwaves. I mean, we've got all this competing energy that our society is creating. Even if we, could tap into this, innate thing, we've got way too much riding against us.
Right.
But is it our fault, or are we truly like past the point where that was a thing? I mean, look at Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, and the background behind that, and how he developed that world and what he was using to build the worlds. He was using these, he learned ancient Norse, and went and he looked at all these, and he was looking at private collections. You want to talk about the stuff that we were, the Vatican archives, and people who have special privilege. Tolkien had special privilege. He had access to stuff that no human being that, except save a handful of people that are alive to this day, would be able to access.
Right.
And he out of that created this world. And it's interesting how much that world resonates so much with people. It certainly does with me. I mean, I'm a huge, Lord of the Rings fan. I mean, obviously, I was fairly young when the movies came out, and I got really into the movie, and I read all the books, and I've gone back and read it and listened to the audiobook, and really enjoy the movies.
Yeah.
So I've kind of been a Tolkien head my good portion of my life. And I'm certainly not the only one, and there's a reason, and you read through this stuff, and you hear him talk about this magical world that existed, and all these different races of beings that existed on this planet, and all the different things that we talk about today that are potentials of our past, giants or trolls, elves, dwarves, all these concepts. And then you go into like the ancient, the fairy myths, and all this ancient history and construction, and you start to wonder, like, was this a more, I'm just going to say it, did we miss out on the magic world? I think we might have missed it. I mean, that's when you start really getting the balls, the imagination wheel spinning.
Sure. And again, there are a lot of people asking that question. I mean, maybe I'm just more seeped in that world, but like I've come across a lot of people who are really starting to ask that question. So
sure.
It might just
I
be
think
the
there
nature
may
of
be
humanity to have that imagination and that desire. But
and is it connected to the actual planet itself? Are we not able to access those things because we don't live in that environment anymore because of a great cataclysm? Of course, Christians or any Abrahamic religions would talk about the flood.
Sure.
Certainly that would be a pretty, a flood to that level would certainly not only erase a civilization that may have known about this type of stuff, but also really was caused by something that did more damage than just flooding. It may have changed the energetic state of the planet. It may have caused all these problems. Or you go back to the Younger Dryas cataclysm, or whatever they call it, Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the Randall Carlson stuff with what they speculate might have been a comet. They're not really sure. Maybe volcanic activity, maybe something much more sinister. But they talk about the Atlantean civilization. Graham Hancock, that's what's how he kind of made his way into the world, and one of the first people I got into, really my first jump into alternate history and archaeology was with Graham Hancock's books, Fingerprints of the Gods and all that kind of stuff. So it's certainly a compelling argument to be made that there was this prior global civilization previous to 12,000 years ago that was wiped out, and did they have access to this? Are we looking at old infrastructure from this same thing that they talk about when Graham talks about this lost civilization of Atlantis? Or we talk about the are we the survivors of this cataclysm, this flood, whatever, that rebuilt the world, and so I don't know. It's certainly something to wonder about, because it seems like the truth is often hidden in fiction, and in particular, it seems like there's more truths than not in Tolkien's writing. Right. That tends to resonate with people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's also, when you talk about, the powers that be, there's a lot invested in, humans not recognizing their power or potential power, and not having access to the power that lies naturally in the earth. Because if they knew how powerful they were, then the powers that be would be less powerful. So
yeah,
there's motive there, if nothing else. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, I don't know. I mean, we covered quite a bit. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add. Yeah.
I mean, I think we covered all of it and more. I mean, certainly so, I don't think we, of course it's never enough. We could probably do a whole other
we can do another
section on any number of topics. So
yeah. Well, I'm happy to. We can revisit. Yeah. So and dive into
absolutely.
Yay. Awesome.
Maybe we could start, bring a skeptic on or something and have them try to just kidding. I would actually find that one day it would be interesting to see if there would ever be someone willing to try to bring more than just, logical fallacies to a conversation about these topics, because there are a few on our site. There are a few people that they don't necessarily buy into all of this, all this stuff, but they're not presenting it in a way that's dismissive per se, or just sort of just using logical fallacies or just discreditation tactics. So there's always good conversation to be had around these topics, and certainly my opinion does not represent the whole of any one particular group or another. I'm just a guy who has absorbed a lot of it and has my own thoughts related to my experiences and what I've dealt with and what I've seen and what I've experienced and what I've looked into. And like I said, I said this last time too, I strongly recommend that, instead of just taking this information, repeating it ad nauseum to somebody who's never heard about it, do the research for yourself, go out and do your own local research, especially is huge. It's so valuable to try to find out more information in local towns, and you have access to many more resources, not just photos and documents and things like that, but also just people that live in the town, people that had family members that have stories, and just listen to people. And maybe you had that one aunt who had that crazy story about something that gets you thinking about an old building, or a buried floor or something along those lines, and you're going to find that eventually you're going to run into something that's gonna get you hooked on trying to find out more. So again, you can always join our site, make an account. It's totally free. Or like I said, we do have content on YouTube that people can watch. We understand that hundreds of thousands of posts and things like that can get overwhelming to people, especially if they're pretty new to it. So we're in the process of trying to, like I mentioned earlier, like put some of the greatest ofs or some of the lesser known but solidly, put together research and creating some content, video content around that, to kind of get people familiar with a lot of these concepts. So trying to make it more accessible to people and trying not to, put the stank on it that a lot of these people do with a lot of the different theories that can get a little bit on the questionable side. So
totally. Yeah, no, I think if nothing else, it's great for people to just start asking questions. And I think we live in an age, I think I said this last time too, but we just live in an age where people have been spoon fed for so long that they just accept whatever narrative has been fed to them. So they really don't inquire. And we should never stop asking questions. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
they hate me when I show up at museums. I'll tell you that much.
I can imagine.
Me coming. You see me coming. I went to, there's a local history museum here in Fort Smith that's actually really good. It's got a lot of really interesting artifacts. Like it's mostly artifacts from the city that like businesses have saved. So like, a hotel closed down, they saved some stuff. Some of these wealthy people donated their own like steam. This one guy, I mean, literally like kind of a steampunk fantasy, these like fire trucks that were steam powered, and they have these things. So there's some of these places really do hold on to a lot of that stuff, and it didn't really have that kind of mainstream dressing to all of it. It kind of just presented it as is, and you kind of go from there. So there's there's a lot of places in this world where you can go and find that stuff for yourself. So take the weekend, take some time, do some digging, go to your local lake and try to find out if there's some weird stuff out there, old Native American burial grounds or evidence of old cemeteries, anything. It's the important thing is you're there and you're thinking about the nature of your reality, and what you can and cannot prove, and what and what you don't know. It's pretty humbling.
Yeah, for sure. What would you recommend to somebody who's like a total newbie to all of this and wants to start doing some of their own research? Where would they start? Or what are some suggestions of places they could start?
Just take a stroll around your local town and take lots of pictures and go and look over them, and walk into some of these places, see if there's someone that might be able to tell you a little bit of local history about the place, what it used to be, and then just do your own research online. Try to find out who built it, when it was built, find old maps of the towns you live in. We have a chat room sort of server that you can also, again, is included with your registration, and we have lots of more laid back conversations. It's not as formal as a forum with replies and things like that, but more of a laid back environment for people to hang out, and maybe they just want to bounce some ideas off of people, or we have an investigation request section on our forum, which is hey, can someone find out more about this for me? And there are you'd be surprised the people that would come out of the woodwork and what people will find for you on your behalf, without you having to lift a finger of research. So there's a whole group, subsection of people that are willing to lead you down the right path. So yeah, other than, like I said, doing, just trying to see how much you can dig locally, and then kind of supplant that with, or combine that with your internet research. There are archive sites, places you can try to look for old books, libraries, library collections. We have a huge thread of useful links, to things like, photo galleries, and all types of different resources that one can use to, places where you can search, the government, the loc.gov. That's like a Library of Congress, right? The Library of Congress has like tons and tons and tons of like newspapers. You can just search till you're, all day and find all this crazy stuff. in these old newspapers and things. So, there's lots of resources online that you can use to help you with your local research. But then just, finding people that are like-minded who are willing to help you and assist you with your research. And, eventually, like I said, hopefully one day we have a place where people can start actually sending in research, scientific research, trying to test these hypotheses out, one day down the road, who knows, but certainly something that I think about as a resource for people in the future. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, I hope that does happen. That would be really awesome. So yeah. Cool. Well, thank you. And till next time.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.